Okay, so a couple of different ways about creating fog and for your environment. There are a number of different methods basically people will try to utilize for fog and kind of like distorting the scene up. Um, I like to stick with the Arnold's AI fog because it's a little bit easier to control just in the final render. Now, if you get into the effects tabs and you get into particle emitters, you can emit like smoke and fog, and that's kind of for another lesson basically, which is basically more central. Sometimes you can create a container box and fill that box up with kind of a smoke fog. Use that as your fog setting. That's good. I mean, that works for some things with a lot of render time and a lot of time to simulate because you're using simulations. But what I like to use is basically just the AI fog to get me where I'm going. Now, what I have here in this render here, it can be done by utilizing kind of the atmospheric volumetric, which we talked about earlier, and then kind of manipulating. Right now, I just have a spotlight shooting volumetric light, kind of like a washed out God ray type thing across the entire scene I've got here. And if you just basically, if you turn your density down, then you'll get less and less of it. But you don't really have no really way of controlling anyway except for moving around the light. So if this works, for whatever it is, it may take a little bit longer to render, but there is a way that you can kind of go about controlling the fog, basically how far and near from the camera it is and how far up from the ground plane it is. So what I'll do is I'm going to get rid of the spotlight. I'm going to get rid of this atmospheric volume here. Now I have no lights in my scene. And I've just created this little tiny scene here. What I'm going to do is drop a new directional light. Turn this off. Angle down with it. So now we can see where we're at. I have a camera set up too, locked into place that I'm rendering through. And I've just dropped in some little fence I created and some little trees that were in the browser. So you see I don't have any fall or anything like that, and I just kind of want to make it what it is. Well, first things first, this is where we added the atmospheric pressure or atmospheric volume. If you'll notice down here, there's AI fog. Just add that in, all of a sudden you've got this kind of washed out kind of leaves like a nice little gradient in it. And you may kind of wonder, well, how do we go about controlling this fog, getting it to look a little bit more instead of just kind of overexposing our scene? Well, that's all in the attributes right here. But the first things first, if you kind of think about it, you won't be able to see like a physical box basically that the smoke will emit. In other words, like for the most part, if you created an emitter, you're going to have basically like this is my box here. If you created an emitter with smoke, you'll basically be able to control the outline form of where the smoke is, and it's all contained in, say, like a clear wireframe piece of geometry. Well, it's the same way with the AI fog, except basically your entire scene is that geometry. In other words, so it's kind of important where you're looking at your camera. I like to start off just looking at it from the front view because that's where it resets the attributes of the fog, in other words, and you'll kind of see what I'm talking about here. So I have my camera set kind of in the front view, and it's pretty close. I've got, everything's kind of scaled down pretty low. So let me just go back over here and I'll show you what I'm talking about. So in other words, this is the color the fog is permitting at. I'll change the color. So already you can see it's starting to emit. Basically, the distance from the camera now, it's basically on the camera. So the fog is basically in the camera. Usually when fog, you'll see fog from a distance, you'll see it basically, you'll be able to see very clear at the front, but then you'll see it's kind of cloudy in the back, and you kind of go about adjusting that. So it's like 0.5, now you can see it, he's starting to kind of see them. 0.8, no, we're actually moving back. I want to go 0.3. You can see my line down here thicker, it's starting to move back. So now I'm just going to go 0.005, or actually, so now I'm kind of starting to move back now. Let's see. Let's go back even more. Let's just go to 0.8. There we go. So now I've kind of basically pushed it back here to where it's more predominant by on this fence line. So now you can kind of like control the height of it, and this is where you start to kind of get that murky feel of it. Let me get back to 0.2 and see what happens. Kind of bring it up here so you'll be able to see it kind of rising up. So I'm going to take this down to 1, see where I'm at. What it's doing is basically we're using this. If you read this document, I will attach. Oh, okay, here it is. You can see basically how it fills up the distance from the axis, because that's where it's basically utilizing the fog line axis is from this X, Y, Z. In other words, turn this off. In other words, the height value changes the rate of the decay along the directional axis of what you're using it for. Same way with the distance, in other words. So it's like if you're running on the Z-axis, it's going to push it back this way, which is what we are doing now, basically. So let me change my ground normal. This, I'll change it to 1 there. So now we're basically pushing up from the ground, from the X, from the Y-axis, basically. And you can adjust the height of this right here, so it's like 0.5. You can get it thicker at the bottom. And if you want to get it closer now to you, there we go. Now it kind of looks like he's standing in a murky zone. See, this is your ground plane, basically, right there that you assigned it. You can bring it in from the side, kind of. Change this back to 0. In other words, your ground point can be like this axis here, going up and down, and bring it in from the side with these right down here. Negative. What do I do with the negative? Now he's kind of like pushing through this here, this fog here, fog scene. You can actually animate this stuff too. It's really cool to kind of like move it on your scene. So the coordinates I found with this one is I didn't have anything with my ground point. I didn't move it because I'm already on the grid, but what I want for this scene is I basically want the fog to rise like he's standing in some waters or something. So I'm going to get my distance back to, I don't want that. Oh, I'm sorry, my height, maybe. There we go, because I wanted fog back there, in other words. I'll go back to 0.2 of that. There we go, because I want the sky to be dominant a little bit, but also want it to be like more dominant down here, so just kind of like. And again, this will change with each scene basically, but understanding that this is your ground normal is basically which direction that it will go in, kind of, and then the height and distance work off of that. And you can change your ground point from what axis it's going off. I have it basically set at 0 right now, so it's coming off just the up on it. And seeing this works for me because like this kind of, if I wanted to go and create like a little plane, let me see. Some sculpting tool. Oop, not that much. I'll make like a little water. That's almost too much. Just to give me some waves here. Move that over. I wonder what that's going to look like with no shader on it. It already looks like kind of foggy. Like it's, now I can kind of turn this into water just by adding a shader, or make it look more like a water. And this is just extra added stuff I'm doing now. Kind of turn my render off. This will be my swamp. Transmission down a little bit. Yeah, so now you can kind of see the reflection of it. Kind of looks like a swamp there. He's standing in there. It's giving off a little reflection though, which I don't really like. The only thing about the AI fog though too is it's not really affected by volume. You can't really use the atmospheric volume and the AI fog basically at the same time. So it's kind of a relative of like what looks better with the atmospheric volume. Now there probably is ways that you can go about rendering when it comes to rendering the two out. Like if you were to render out this version with the fog and then render out the spotlight rays on there too and kind of like composite them together, that's an option too. But other than that though, I mean, this is how it kind of works. It's just basically how you have your scene set up to how you control that distance. You control your ground plane, your distance of how you want to use it. For a lot of like graveyard scenes, I really like the fog coming off the ground. And for stuff like this right here, you know, maybe I want to kind of raise it up now a little bit. Kind of in the water. But yeah, that looks really cool, I think. But yeah, so have fun with that, and that is, and I will put the document reading so you can kind of study up on some of the attributes and stuff like that. So, okay, well, thanks for watching.